Pliny was a very brilliant scientific sort of individual, diplomat, governor in ancient Rome. Around about the year 100, Pliny the Elder was a Roman admiral, I believe, very brilliant man, and Pliny the Younger was I think it was his adopted nephew. But Pliny the Elder died in the Mount Vesuvius eruption that buried Pompeii and Herculaneum, trying to rescue the people, and Pliny the Younger witnessed the eruption. And Pliny the Younger, later on in his life, that eruption I think was 79 AD, Pliny the Younger later on became governor of, I think he was Bithynia, which is now in Turkey. So this is around the year 111 AD, 112 AD. And it's interesting because he experienced Christianity, the spread of Christianity in this area. So he writes a letter to the Emperor Trajan. And here's his letter, translated in English, of course. It is my practice, my lord, to refer to you all matters concerning which I am in doubt, for who can better give guidance to my hesitation or inform my ignorance? I have never participated in trials of Christians. I therefore do not know what offenses it is the practice to punish or investigate, and to what extent. And I have been not a little hesitant as to whether there should be any distinction on account of age, or no difference between the very young and more mature, whether pardon is to be granted for repentance, or if a man has once been a Christian, it does him no good to have ceased to be one, whether the name itself, even without offenses, or only the offenses associated with the name, are to be punished. Meanwhile, in the case of those who were denounced to me as Christians, I have observed the following procedure. I interrogated these as to whether or not they were Christians. Those who confessed I interrogated a second and a third time, threatening them with punishment. Those who persisted I ordered executed. For I had no doubt that, whatever the nature of their creed, stubbornness and inflexible obstinacy surely deserved to be punished. There were others possessed of the same folly, but because they were Roman citizens, I signed an order for them to be transferred to Rome. Soon accusations spread, as usually happens, because of the proceedings going on, and several incidents occurred. An anonymous document was published, containing the names of many persons. Those who denied that they were or had been Christians when they invoked the gods in words dictated by me, offered a prayer with incense and wine to your image, which I had ordered to be brought for this purpose, together with the statues of the gods, and moreover cursed Christ, none of which those who are really Christians, it is said, can be forced to do. These I thought should be discharged. Others, named by the informer, declared that they were Christians, but then denied it, asserting that they had been, but they'd ceased to be some 3 years before. Others many years, some as much as 25 years. They all worshipped your image and the statues of the gods, and cursed Christ. They asserted, however, that the sum and sustenance of their fault or error had been that they were accustomed to meet on a fixed day before dawn, and sing responsively a hymn to Christ as to a god, and to bind themselves by oath not to some crime, but not to commit fraud, theft, or adultery, not to falsify their trust, nor to refuse to return a trust when called upon to do so. When this was over, it was their custom to depart and assemble again to partake of food, but ordinary and innocent food. Even this they affirmed they had ceased to do after my edict, by which, in accordance with your instructions, I had forbidden political associations. Accordingly, I judged it all the more necessary to find out what the truth was by torturing 2 female slaves who were called deaconesses. But I discovered nothing else but depraved, excessive superstition. I therefore postponed the investigation and hastened to consult you, for the matter seemed to me to warrant consulting you, especially because of the number involved. For many persons of every age, every rank, and also of both sexes are and will be endangered. For the contagion of this superstition has spread not only to the cities, but to the villages and farms. But it seems possible to check and cure it. It is certainly quite clear that the temples, which had been almost deserted, have begun to be frequented, that the established religious rites long neglected are being resumed, and that from everywhere sacrificial animals are coming, for which until now very few purchasers could be found. Hence it is easy to imagine what a multitude of people can be reformed if an opportunity for repentance is afforded. Okay, now Trajan, the Emperor Trajan, responds to Pliny. You observed proper procedure, my dear Pliny, in sifting the cases of those who had been denounced to you as Christians, for it is not possible to lay down any general rule to serve as a kind of fixed standard. They are not to be sought out. If they are denounced and proved guilty, they are to be punished, with this reservation, that whoever denies that he is a Christian, and really proves it, that is, by worshipping our gods, even though he was under suspicion in the past, shall obtain pardon through repentance. But anonymously posted accusations ought to have no place in any prosecution, for this is both a dangerous kind of precedent and out of keeping with the spirit of our age. Okay, I was aware of this a long time ago, back in the days when I was an atheist, and I have to tell you that this always bothered me, this document. One, this took place around the year 1110, 1115, or I'm sorry, 110, 115, something like that. So that means it's maybe 75, perhaps 80 years after the crucifixion. Now, I knew a woman who was born in 1889, okay? She died in the 1970s, but I grew rather close to her, and I knew her pretty well, as I could consider her a friend at the time. I had long talks with her for more than an hour at a time. She was bedridden when she was dying, but her mind was sharp, and she said that was a kind of a curse for her. But she told me a lot of stories about her grandfather, who had been married in 1843, I believe. And her grandfather she knew really well. He treated her like a princess when she was a little girl. Okay? And he died in the 1890s, shortly before the turn of the century, when she was 11. So the interesting thing is that she was about the same age when her grandfather died as I was when she passed away. So I had experiences of her that she had similar to her grandfather. So hours at a time, got to know a lot of the stories, a lot of her memories she shared with me that I still have. So I think about that, okay? I think that that is a living memory. That's the length of it. So I knew her, and she knew this guy who got married in 1843. I don't remember when he was born, but I remember his marriage. So he's probably born around 1820, okay? So that's the stretch of time that I believe you can really transmit accurate information. When you're hearing it firsthand from somebody who witnessed it, and you spend a great deal of time with that person, and you get to know that person, and you can trust that person's memory, especially when you meet other people who experience the same memory, all right? And that's going to be possible for a certain length of time, and that's what I call a living memory, okay? So I think the 1850s, to me, about 120 years, is a really good living memory, a period of about 120 years back. So you can get to know people really well, and you can research and you can find several people who will remember that far back. So let's say I'm in the Philippines right now, okay? So let's say the Philippine independence movement of 1898. That's about 120 years. Okay, now, you cannot meet today anyone who will remember that. In order to remember that, you'd have to be my cousin Retta's age, probably born about 1889 at the latest. Okay, so she would have been 9 years old at that time. So she would have memories of that, but no one beyond after that would really have accurate memories, okay? So you can meet people, though, like me, who got to know people from that generation that experienced it. So one step removed, all right? And you can still get accurate, real memories from people who knew people who experienced it. Now, in another generation, if you go back farther, let's say 150 years, then you're really getting into hazy, out of focus experiences, because you're talking about second generation, second removed experiences. So my memories of Cousin Retta and her grandfather are very real to me, but I'm not going to be able to communicate the whole reality of it to my son. So when my son grows up, he's not going to be able to communicate the reality of Cousin Retta and her age to his children. So that's a secondary removed, okay? So to me, about 120 years or less has always been very accurate. So Pliny is writing this. These deaconesses were practicing 75 to 80 years after the crucifixion. So these deaconesses knew personally the apostles, or they knew people who were appointed to positions of leadership by the apostles. And I'll give you an example of that. Polycarp was a bishop in, I think, Smyrna in Turkey, probably close to where Pliny was governor. Polycarp, around the year 100, went to see the Pope in Rome. Now, I was taught that it was Pope Clement, but I later found out it was another Pope. But Pope Clement was Pope around the year 100. Polycarp was bishop around the year 100. They were both appointed to their positions by the apostles. So the writings of Polycarp, the writings of Pope Clement still survive. These people knew the apostles. These people were bishops and a pope. It's rather interesting, actually, researching why Bishop Polycarp went to Rome, because the Eastern churches were starting to form different liturgical traditions, different liturgy in church, different practices in church for the Eucharist, different dates they were setting for Easter. All of that was already happening around the year 100. So this is the first generation after the death of the disciples. So clearly the liturgy, the Eucharist, the singing of hymns, was focus of Christian life. And that is what is expressed here in this letter. Pliny is not a Christian. The emperor is not a Christian. But Pliny's investigating and finding out, boom, deaconesses. There is the episcopacy, okay? You do have formal ordination in the church at this time. Deacons. Now, in the past, the Russian Orthodox Church, to my understanding, still has ordained deaconesses. Some churches still have an ordained female deacon. The reason for that is because they had the full body submersion for baptism. And if you have an adult woman being baptized, okay, her whole body's going into the pool, and you have to help her out. And it's better if you have a woman help her out than a man who's committed to celibacy, okay? So that's the explanation I was always given about the female deaconesses. You have to have that for the full body baptism. But you've got the liturgy described here, okay, a formal liturgy, and you've got the deaconesses. So you have, no doubt, priests at this time. Of course, Bishop Polycarp and Pope Clement were already deceased, I think, by this time, around the year 115. So you already have bishops and popes and deaconesses and the liturgy. So you really have the Catholic Church existing at this time. And it's really difficult to argue against that, because Pliny describes it very, very well. So the church, as it exists now, the seeds of that was already growing within living memory of the apostles. Now, why the AD-BC break? Why did they restart the calendar? As an atheist, I thought this was absurd, and I was totally into the BCE, before the Common Era, which is a slap in the face. Anybody who says BCE is slapping 1,000 years of our ancestors in the face, because this is something they did deliberately, because there's a great deal of evidence that the world did indeed change profoundly after Christ was born. Okay, so the death of the god Pan is one thing that's widely reported at the time. The god Pan was a very present demigod, I guess you would say. The pagan world had many, many gods and goddesses, okay, that interacted with humans in varying degrees. And I'm not going to go into the pagan theology, but you would do certain things in order to prevent the gods from interfering with you, and you would do certain things because you wanted the gods to help you with certain things. So the god Pan was one of those trickster gods that really could mess up your life, and the idea of panic was the god Pan playing games with your mind and your ability to focus, and he could interact with you in a playful manner like that and really kind of mess you up, prevent you from making good decisions and things like that. So that's one reason why you would follow these observances to worship the god Pan, is to prevent these kind of mistakes you could make from being in a panic, to remain calm in disasters, things like that. So the god Pan actually died. According to the Greek historian Plutarch, Pan is the only Greek god who actually died during the reign of the Emperor Tiberius, who was emperor from the year 14 to 37 AD, which was during the time of the crucifixion. The news of Pan's death came to one Tamus, a sailor on his way to Italy by way of the island of Paxi. A divine voice hailed him across the saltwater. "Tamus, are you there? When you reach Paludis, take care to proclaim that the great god Pan is dead." Which Tamus did, and the news was greeted on shore with groans and laments. Okay, it's really interesting if you look into that. That was a cause of concern for the ancient people living at that time. Not only that, okay, but you have Plutarch also writing about the oracles. Now, the oracles were very, very famous in the ancient world. You would go to an oracle because the gods were very close to these female priestesses, who I believe were called sibyls. So you would go to an oracle, you would pay the priest, and tell the priest your concern or your problem, or you wish to know about this. Should I marry this person? Should I go on this trip? I have a bad feeling about it. Should I postpone it? Things like that. The Greeks petitioned the oracle at Delphi for help when the Persians were invading, and the Persians were bringing a huge army they couldn't hope to defeat. And the oracle at Delphi famously told the Greeks that they would fall behind a wall of rock, but if they sought shelter behind a wall of wood, they would prevail. And the wall of wood, of course, was their ships, and they relied on their navy and evacuated the city and allowed the Persians to burn their city, but they won in a naval battle. And that's one famous example of the oracles. So you'd go, you'd pay this priest, the priest would consult the sibyl would kind of murmur in this sort of drunken kind of haze, and the priest would interpret her rantings and chantings and bring you back an answer. And there's a lot of information out there about how amazing these oracles were. And of course, if it didn't work, it wouldn't be famous. You know, if it does work, if there's something to it, something mysterious, you're going to have a lot of people coming there, and that's exactly what happened. You had a lot of these oracles. Well, at the time of Christ's mission, these oracles disappeared. There's a really good word that's used here, evanescent. Evanescent. You should look that up, evanescent. It means like disappearing like smoke in the wind. It's really a good word. So here's Plutarch here. I'll leave the links for this in the description. You can read all this yourself. But Plutarch is having a meeting with these other educated people in Greece. When Ammonius had ceased speaking, I said, "Won't you rather tell us about the oracle Cleombrotus? For great was the ancient repute of this divine influence there, but at the present time it seems somewhat evanescent." So it's just faded away as smoke in the wind. As Cleombrotus made no reply and did not look up, that's an interesting description right there. You know, if the guy's just defeated looking in the ground, it's gone, you know. It's just gone. Demetrius said, "There's no need to make any inquiries, nor to raise any questions about the state of affairs there. When we see the evanescence of the oracles here, or rather the total disappearance of all but one or two, we should deliberate the reason why they've become so utterly weak. What need to speak of others, when in Boeotia, which in former times spoke with many tongues because of its oracles, the oracles have now failed completely, even as if they were streams of flowing waters, and a great drought in prophecy has overspread the land." That's really interesting, you know. So these oracles just stopped. Now, a friend of mine, who's an evangelical, was familiar with all this. I was talking to him about all this at the fire station one day, and he's an evangelical minister, has his own church now. He's going to be famous one of these days. He's definitely got the spirit. He told me without hesitation, he said, "You know, that all comes from Luke. I think it's Luke chapter 8, when Christ casts out the demon from the man and puts the demons that are possessing this man into a giant herd of pigs. That's like more than 1,000 pigs that all go running off the cliff. So he casts 1,000 demons out of this man. The man says that the demons identify themselves to the Lord as we are legion, so we are thousands, you know. And that's what the evangelical friend of mine theorized, that all this happened because Christ cast out all these demons from the world that had been interacting regularly with humanity for thousands of years. And that's one big shift in from the ancient world, that these oracles just died. Okay, now here's the interesting thing, looping back to that Pliny letter, okay? The Pliny letter reaffirms that. Did you catch it? Okay, at the end of the Pliny's letter to the Emperor Trajan, he says, "For the contagion of this superstition has spread not only to the cities but also the villages and farms, but it seems possible to check and cure it. It's certainly quite clear that the temples, which had been almost deserted, have begun to be frequented, and the established religious rites long neglected are being resumed." So the people of their own free will just walked away from these pagan temples. They stopped performing these religious rites that probably had roots in the Ice Age. These pagan rites and rituals had gone back for thousands of years. They'd performed these same rituals and rites. The Vestal Virgins in ancient Rome had a history that went back to probably the Ice Age. Their job was to keep the fire lit. And if you can imagine living in the Ice Age, if your fire goes out, you're never going to get it lit. So you had specific people that did nothing but tend the fire. And that lasted up until the year 300 something, when they finally just said enough of the Vestal Virgins, we don't need them anymore. It's interesting. The people walked away from the pagan temples on their own. Now, the minute Pliny, the governor, requires the people to do this, requires the people to go back, at that moment, those pagan religions were dead. And if you can see what I'm talking about, the minute you're forced to do it, it's dead. It's no longer a religious practice. That was my argument about. I love having it with people who are big Darwinian, evolutionary fans of Darwin. Have them read Michael Bede's book, Darwin's Black Box. And after you read that book, there's a lot of questions about, if evolution does happen, is this circumstance? Why is this circumstance? And those questions cannot be answered. And the minute scientists try to teach Darwin without addressing those concerns, then evolution is gone. It's really a thing of the past. Because it's become like those pagan religions. You're forced to do it. You're forced to do it not because of your own free will, not because it's logical and makes sense and it's the best thing there is. You're doing it out of compulsion because of fear. So, anyway, those are my thoughts on the ADBC. Something indeed did happen in the ancient world after the birth of Christ, during his mission, and at his crucifixion. Something did indeed happen. And the world after that would forever be changed. And there's a great deal of evidence for it. I'll put the links for the Plutarch article and the Pliny article in the description. Hope you have a good day. Take care all.